Welcome, everyone, and thank you all for attending today's webinar, Fueling Her Next Chapter, Testing, Trust, and Thoughtful Supplementation for the Pregnant and Postpartum Athlete. Before we begin, let me start by introducing your panelists for today. Today's moderator is going to be Carla Devlin, Senior Strategic Account Manager for Informed, and she's joined in the booth today by Mel Sulaver, Founder and CEO of Nutrition by Mel. Before we begin, I just wanted to let you all know that we will be opening up the chat for a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So if at any point during the webinar today you have any questions you'd like asked, feel free to type it in there and we'll try to work through all the questions at the end of the webinar. This being said, we'd like to thank you all once again for coming out, and now I will hand things off to Carla.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Zach. Yes, thank you everybody for joining today. I'm super excited about this webinar. As Zach said, I'm delighted to introduce Mel Sulaver, a registered dietitian and global advocate for women in sport. Mel specializes in bridging women's health and performance nutrition, helping athletes navigate challenges like RED-S, menstrual health, and the menopause. Her mission is to empower women to help with their physiology, and today she'll share insights on how safe and certified supplementation, like those tested through Informed Sport, can support health and performance. And just from a personal perspective, I'm really excited about the talk today because I previously was an elite athlete. I represented Great Britain in the 2008 Beijing Olympics, and I stopped rowing after the Beijing Olympics, even though I desperately wanted to do another Olympiad. And the reason behind that was because I wanted to start a family. So being able to maintain my kind of elite sporting status and train and think about having a family wasn't really an option back in 2008. So I love the fact that now that is potentially an option. Lots of hurdles, kind of lots of support needed. But the fact we're even having this conversation makes me really pleased and really excited to welcome Mel to the webinar. Over to you, Mel.
Thanks, Carla. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. Let's get rocking. So we're going to go through a couple of things today in terms of sport-specific supplementation during these windows, but I need you to understand kind of physiologically what's going on for our pregnant and postpartum athlete, because a lot of people view pregnancy itself, birth, postpartum as a medical event, and it is. But for active women, it's also an athletic season. It's an entirely different season of life, and it is one of the most physically demanding that we might encounter because it's so different than anything we've ever trained or prepared for. So there's a couple different things going on. Obviously, we're building new tissue. We are creating a new organ. We're building a placenta throughout the first trimester in particular, which is part of why a lot of people don't feel great during that season of time. There's muscle moving around, fascia. There's a huge shift in blood volume, which is going to impact our iron stores and the necessity for foods and supplementation potentially that include iron. And we're also working on an entirely new metabolism as we are growing the fetus. So, you know, to give you an idea on that perspective, the baby doesn't have their own fully functional thyroid until about 20 weeks gestation. So when we think about thyroid health and metabolic health in general, they are entirely reliant on us in those first 20 weeks. As we move into postpartum, we think about healing. So depending on how this baby made their way into the world, if it was a vaginal delivery, even within that, you could have all different types of tearing, which are going to require tissue healing and recovery. If there was a cesarean, that is a full abdominal surgery. So in that sense, you know, you bring in what is required for the body to heal, for the body to recover, dramatic hormonal shifts that occur not just through pregnancy, but in particular those early days postpartum. And then we get into lactation, if that is something that our mother athlete is choosing to do or able to do or wanting to do, which is an entirely different set of energetic demands. And so there's a lot happening here. And for us to be able to understand why supplementation matters, you know, I want to kind of walk through some of this lived experience piece that you're going to see your athletes engage in. So a little more on this, you know, again, basic basal metabolic rate increases. You know, we talk about like the protein synthesis and tissue remodeling components. The iron needs nearly doubling. That kind of plays right back into that blood volume piece. omega-3 demands increase for fetal neurodevelopment. They are also important for maternal mental health in terms of preventing depression, not just in postpartum, but also potentially during pregnancy. If we think about the amount of sleep deprivation that occurs, some of that is expected postpartum. There's a lot of new moms that don't expect that to happen in pregnancy, but a lot of times your sleep is also rocked during that time, whether it's because you are just physically uncomfortable in your body, or again, hormonally, there's just a lot happening where there are more frequent wake ups. And in terms of talking about lactation, now being conscious of calorie levels here, I think it's important to give a range and perspective. If we look at some of the literature, which is looking at just general population, it is not looking at active women and competitive athletes. What I will tell you is what I have seen in practice is upwards of 700 calories a day extra just for lactation in some of my active populations, whereas for people who are more sedentary, it might be closer to that 500 range. So lactation in and of itself is a huge energy cost to the body. And then we toggle onto that some of these barriers that we get into that just end up happening that we need to navigate. You think about the nausea and the sensory overwhelm. Sometimes
Mel, can I just
when
quickly,
you,
can I jump in? So
yes,
sorry to interrupt. You just mentioned research there, and I'm really intrigued. I have a very good friend that runs an education platform in the UK called the Well HQ, and she's constantly talking about the lack of research in women's sport alone, let alone looking at research for kind of pregnant postpartum women. Do you feel like that's growing and there's an emphasis and a need? Well, I know that the need is there, but are people starting to look at this area and put more resource into it?
Not the crossover. There's no active that I know of. There's no active study going on, at least on the nutrition side. So Dr. Margie Davenport is driving a lot of the physiology component of like from very competitive elite athlete in pregnancy, in postpartum. She's also kind of tying into that she has a PhD student right now that's looking at some of the lactation impacts. So that's the most that's going on. There was a Delphi study that was done basically assessing the need further so that we can have a research agenda. And I was part of that Delphi study. So I do believe it's coming. I think the next 15 years is going to bring a lot. But we just like need it to happen. We need the funding, we need the resources. And, you know, I think research is such an interesting conversation to get involved in. I know you and I had spoken about this. I've been very conscious in working with researchers to inform how we ask better questions. Maybe how can we explore other ways of getting funding? How do we share with the public that actually funding that would come from industry is really valuable? And versus, I think sometimes the way it is perceived on social media is, well, if this company funded this supplement or this trial, then it's null and void. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. That's actually where some of that money can come from and actually be really valuable. And there's enough blinders on when studies are actually done where there isn't going to be a conflict of interest. So I think there's a lot there, I guess. Is what I'm trying to say.
So the take home is we're behind the curve, but it's gaining momentum, and we really need to kind of keep piling in as much resource and attention to it as we can. Brilliant. Okay, sorry, thank you. Carry on.
Enough of us. No, of course, I think there's a lot of people fighting the good fight, and a lot of discussions on collaboration to see how we continue to slowly but surely move that needle forward. So, and yes, everybody, so you know, Carla's just going to pause me when we're going to talk because I can only see the presentation. I cannot see any of you. So just so you know. All right, so just driving home some of barrier components. And this is where really that one-on-one nutrition work comes in as a dietitian, or if you have a support team around you as an athlete, or as I like to build support teams around my athlete, be it if it's pelvic health, physios, the right mental health provider. So you have that full support in navigating the different things that might come up, be it if it is kind of the nutrition side of nausea and constipation and discomfort. Eating is a very different experience when you have aversions. it can be really challenging postpartum if your anxiety is so high that you feel like you can't put down the baby to make yourself a meal. So there's a lot of different things that might impact being able to eat, being able to nourish yourself. And part of what my job is to troubleshoot that so that we can best buffer your body and plan for all of the different things that might prevent you from nourishing yourself optimally. So here's where supplements are going to come into play. And also, kind of just being conscious of, as always, supplements are meant to complement our dietary intake. However, this is truly a season of life where they are going to be necessary. It's going to be necessary to supplement. And it's important that we kind of assess your lab work and we have a better understanding of like what your body, what your day, what your life looks like, and how that might shift throughout the course of your pregnancy to be able to best support you heading into something like postpartum. And also, to be honest, speaking to kind of that pre-pregnancy planning, the fertility piece, which again, in some cases is planned, and in other cases, pregnancies are not planned. But when we can plan for a pregnancy, that pre-nourishment and optimization of your body is invaluable because, again, once pregnancy hits, there's going to be navigation of meeting your body exactly where it's at. So being conscious of where this is going to come into play, there's going to be 3 specific supplements I'm going to highlight for you with some what I would call honorable mentions. But, first off, what would make a supplement appropriate to begin with? There's kind of 5 big pieces here that I would check. So you think about the physiological rationale. Again, your body, your needs, your demands, your sport, your activity level, what's going on under the hood. We think about the evidence-based dosing. So you'll see I reference avoiding proprietary blends a couple different times as we move forward in this talk. And that is because it is unclear of exactly what products or herbals or kind of things are in that blend. Whereas if we actually look at the research and specific supplements like creatine monohydrate, for example, specific doses are studied. And so as an evidence-based practitioner, we are making recommendations based on specific doses that are studied. And so we need to know what that dosing is. We think about the actual form of this vitamin, mineral, protein, whatever it is, and how you metabolize that, tolerate that. There are cheaper forms of vitamins. There are more expensive forms of vitamins. And to be honest, just because they're expensive doesn't make them great, but it's more kind of the actual form in which you can digest and absorb that might be most appropriate for you. We think about the purity and transparency. So it could be sourcing. It could be, again, just acknowledging exactly what is in that product that you are taking. And then third-party testing, where you have these different companies that are paying for their products to be tested. So you know exactly what you are taking, and what is on that label is what is in that product. So kind of being thoughtful about language, given the fact that I think the internet has a way of confusing us all and makes it sound like natural just automatically is safe, and that is not true, and that synthetic automatically is a bad thing, and that is also not true. There's a lot of botanicals, or you think of herbs and different supplements along those lines that don't have a lot of safety data. There's not a lot of research behind them, versus some of our more well-studied vitamins and minerals, which is where those micronutrients come into play. And again, when you think of synthetic or looking at a vitamin on a label, if a product is fortified, you'll see a different name for that vitamin than just like vitamin B12. And again, does that mean it's a bad thing? No, it's a different formulation of that vitamin that has been put into a product. So just being conscious of that. And if you have questions about it, that's where you can reach out and ask a professional and say, hey, what exactly does this mean? Versus just making the assumption that because you can't pronounce it, it must be something that's not good for you.
Yeah, Mel, just from kind of informed sports side of things, language is really important for us as well. So with our program, there's no program in the world that can say 100% drugs tested free. We talk about safer for athletes rather than safe, because we know that the WADA anti-doping prohibited list is an open-ended list. So it's an open-ended list that has a catch-all statement saying if there's any compound that has similar biological effects or similar chemical structure, it is also deemed banned. So, you know, we're really confident that we're providing the most robust certification program in the world because of the amount of testing we do, but also, you know, we're not saying 100% banned substance tested. This is, you know, the highest caliber risk mitigation program in the world. But that language is really important, just as you've kind of highlighted there from a different standpoint.
Yeah, language is incredibly important. And again, I think especially with social media and how people are taking in information in 20-second clips, and it's really hard to distill down to a soundbite the science. We're figuring it out, everybody. We're figuring it out, but it's hard to do. And so typically when someone is selling you something on the other side, you just have to raise a flag and be like, is this in fact true? Is this in fact the best thing for my body in this moment in time, or at all for that matter? So, and then just to acknowledge before I kind of move specifically into kind of why testing matters and more on informed sport, you know, again, just being conscious of these herbs, especially in pregnancy and postpartum, because there are things that can impact the pregnancy and contractions. So something like black cohosh, for example, can be found in some supplements, and that can contribute to some uterine contractions. We don't want to have uterine contractions when we're pregnant earlier on in our pregnancy. That's not something that we're trying to start make happen. So we need to be conscious of that. Or you think about certain herbs that you could take during lactation, where they can also impact your milk supply or potentially impact baby's neurodevelopment. So just be very thoughtful about what you read and the things that you're taking into your body within that capacity. So I want to talk a little bit initially about why testing matters, and then I'm going to kick it to Carla to really speak to the informed sport component of this and why I adore this organization as a company and have for many years, especially as a sports dietitian. But what I want you to understand about supplements is that they are regulated. They are regulated. They are just not regulated in the same way that medications are regulated. So it's a different framework. It's the DSHEA, I'm making sure I have that right, the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act. That's at least here in the States. So this aims to ensure safety, labeling accuracy, and manufacturing quality, but it does not require the same pre-market approval process that applies to medications. So it is different than medications. It is regulated. We need to all be on the same page about that. So supplements have to have strict manufacturing standards. They have to label ingredients accurately. They have to avoid disease treatment claims. So you can't put on a supplement saying, if you take this, this will cure diabetes. That's a no-no. They do not need FDA approval before sale. So again, this is kind of the before being on the market piece, but they are monitored after they reach the market. And so if something concerning happens or people start to report an issue, that's when things would really be evaluated versus medications that have to be proven safe and effective before a sale for a specific thing. And there's just a stricter clinical manufacturing and labeling requirement. So I needed to say that because I have also heard, you know, dietitians saying that supplements are not regulated. And I think it's really important for us to just lay that groundwork so everybody is on the same page. Carla, I want to allow for you to speak a little bit more specifically to informed sport.
We have an incredibly robust certification process. So for any brand new brand or product that wants to come onto the program, not only do we have to test the product before it becomes certified, but we also do a manufacturing review of the facility where it's manufactured and packed. So some brands might be utilizing one facility to blend the product, and then that blended product may go to a separate facility where it's packed into sachets. And we're doing reviews of both of those facilities. So we're trying to understand what types of raw materials are held on site. We're understanding what types of quality systems they adhere to. We're looking at their cleaning process processes, traceability, really doing a deep dive in how that facility looks to minimize the risk of cross-contamination of banned substances. That's our USP. That's what we're amazing at. We're hunting out and we're trying to reduce the risk of inadvertent doping from banned substances entering the supply chain. So we do the manufacturing review and we do the testing of the finished products. And once it comes onto the program, they're able to utilize the Informed Sport logo. And from that point onwards, every single batch is tested for banned substances. So if they have, let's say, a powdered product with 3 flavors, every time they produce those 3 different flavors, they all have to come to us for unique testing, and then all of the results are put up onto the Informed Sport website and duplicated onto the app, which is available on Android and Apple, free to download. So trying to make it as easy as possible for the end consumers, the athletes, the military personnel to cross-reference that the product that they have has indeed been tested. On top of that, we also do independent blind testing. So it adds an additional layer of kind of trust and integrity to the program. So we independently purchase between 1 and 4 samples a year, where we purchase the product as if we were a consumer. We bring it to the labs. We should obviously be seeing that we've already tested it, because that's what the program is. On occasion, if we were to purchase a product and it hadn't been tested, that's a massive red flag for us. How did it get to market without having been tested? So we would be working really closely with the brand to ascertain how that happened and making sure obviously we're testing it, and then closing that gap. And then just to give you a bit of an idea of numbers, we started in 2008 with 2008 with Informed Sport, so 17 years ago, and we were testing for about 26 compounds. We're now testing over 300 compounds, and we now have 1,623 products on the program. So that doesn't include all of the flavor variants, size variants, which is pretty impressive. We have brands based in 36 countries, and with a push of export, that's pushing us into over 120 countries. So truly global. If you're a traveling athlete and you're based in the States and you come to Europe to train, you know that you're going to be able to purchase Informed Sport certified products because we're truly global. And we're testing products across 15 different matrix types. So powders, capsules, tablets, sprays. If we think about back in 2008, it was pretty much whey protein and creatine, powdered products, simple matrices. Now we have botanical products, we have gels, we have sprays, we have topicals. So the industry has moved so fast, and it's really important that we can kind of keep up with that. So just wanted to give you a bit of an insight. What is the program? Why is it robust? And then just to talk a little bit about the global footprint. Back over to you, Mel.
So amazing. I met Paul and Andy at an ISSN conference, my first ISSN conference, and that would have been 2012, 2013. So it just, I am forever grateful for Informed Sport, and it's been helpful as a dietitian to be able to support my athletes with, especially as you expressed. I have a number of them who do travel back and forth between the States and outside of the country, and we just have to outsource because it's hard to just bring everything with you, and even just the supplements. And I would say, athlete or not, I don't let people take supplements that aren't Informed Sport tested or any sort of like third-party testing. And typically when I go through, and I would suggest for those of you who are clinicians, or if you're looking for yourself, I typically go through if someone's supplement list as part of their initial assessment, and if anything comes up that doesn't read or doesn't have any information on it, I go straight to the website, I'm looking, and I email them directly. And the 3 times, in my now almost 15 years as a dietitian, the 3 times that I have followed up with companies that had no testing, the responses I got when I emailed them to ask about if they've had their product tested, if they thought about having their product tested, were so nasty. Really? I was like, wow, we're not going to support this company anyway, because there's something going on there if you can't exchange a kind email. So yeah.
I think it's really worth noting that the brands we're working with, it's not mandatory for them to test these products. This is an investment they're making. for them to pass on that quality assurance. They really want that stamp of approval for their products. They believe in their products. They're willing to invest in us and in the program so that they can kind of give that onward assurance to the consumers. So this isn't mandatory. These guys are stepping up to showcase their quality and to work with us in partnership. And I think that says a lot about them as companies.
I do too, and trust is the key word there, because you, as a company, they're creating trust in the consumer by having their products tested, and that's part of why, for me, and that was kind of my continued exchange with any of these, as well, that's unfortunate that you're unwilling to even kind of have a conversation about it, because as someone who supports a lot of athletes and individuals and educates on this, I will not be recommending your product. End period. So, but moving on, generally just specific to the pregnant postpartum population, third-party testing is not a luxury. It is a safety requirement. So not something that I'm willing to negotiate for this population at all. Leading in, I want to talk about what I would call the 3 big supplements that are important to consider in the pregnant postpartum population. Like I said, there are a couple other honorable mentions I'll bring into play, but these are easy to get. They are Informed Sport tested. We can find them. These are 3 different companies that have products that I pulled right from the Informed Sport website. I believe the omega-3 and the protein, or the omega-3 might be a UK supplement. Momentous we can get here, Ritual we can get here. I included Ritual as a protein because they're also a prenatal brand, which we'll talk about as well. But these are the 3 that I would consider having in your toolkit pretty universally for some of the reasons we talked about earlier. And I want to give you a little bit more of a specific as to why on each one. So creatine in general, creatine's pretty hot right now, but I got to tell you, it is the most, maybe outside of caffeine. I'll have to pick some of the long-term sports industry people in my brain, but caffeine's also very well studied. Creatine is probably one of the most well-studied sport-specific supplements we have, but it is no longer just a strength athlete supplement. For pregnancy and postpartum, it might be one of the most valuable toolkits options for us to have. So it literally helps. Creatine specifically helps every cell in our body make and recycle ATP, which is our most basic energy currency, if you will. And during pregnancy, the uterus, the placenta, the fetus, these all rely heavily on energy to grow and adapt. Dr. Stacy Ellerly is doing some incredible research on this. If you want to look up her work, so you can see it is coming out. We also know that creatine stores and transporters increase in those tissues specifically as the pregnancy progresses, so later on in gestation, which suggests that it is biologically essential for us. There is also some data that talks about creatine in human milk and how those levels change across lactation. So we've seen kind of that measurable flux from the umbilical cord to the milk, meaning that the infant also continues to receive it postpartum. So from my perspective, the question isn't why should I be taking creatine? It's why shouldn't I be? So, I think that's something that I'm sure will come up in the questions. It comes up inevitably anytime I have this conversation in terms of dosing. So, in terms of base dosing, the 3 to 5 gram a day, which is, half a teaspoon to a teaspoon, very safe. I give some to my toddler. I've included it in his things, especially when he's going through his season of rebelling against all kinds of food. So from a comfort standpoint, just know that. But, you could consider microdosing if you're actually going through your pregnancy and you're nauseous. You could break that up. So that 5 gram dose, you could break into 2 teaspoons during the day, maybe a quarter teaspoon, which is so tiny, you could pulse dose it throughout the day. So very safe. I think as time goes on, there is a little bit of literature that I've seen that talks about a higher dose, like a 10 gram a day dose during this population. But right now I would feel most comfortable saying start with this 3 to 5 gram. And if you feel comfortable after reading the literature that exists, then you can make that informed decision for yourself if you would like to take more daily. The next one, I feel like nearly everybody knows about, but there's a lot of people who aren't getting enough of it. So omega-3 fatty acids. Now, omega-3s are important for fetal brain development. As mentioned earlier, they are also important for maternal mental health and well-being. And omega-3 intake tends to be pretty low, especially DHA within the postpartum population. If you look at kind of these collective studies that have looked at, as expressed, not athletic populations, but just like general maternal health and well-being. It's also worth noting, so when we talk about lactation specifically, calcium, phosphorus, magnesium are found in breast milk, and their concentration is independent of the intake of the mother. So no matter what the mother is intaking, the baby is going to get what it needs in terms of calcium, phosphorus, and magnesium, which is part of why our bone density takes a hit postpartum. It will rebound back if we are consuming what we need to consume, but it might in fact take a little bit of a hit. Coming back into that, your fat soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K, and also if we think about DHA as an omega-3 fatty acid, when intake increases, when maternal intake increases, that enhances what baby is getting through the breast milk. So if we are not eating enough of these omega-3s via our diet, then the baby is not going to get what they need. And so this is a strong time to consider supplementation if you're someone who doesn't have a diet or, again, isn't able to consume fattier fish, think salmon, sardines, codfish, things along these lines, trout. And then the other thing to be thoughtful about within the context of formulation is heavy metals. So, depending on the sourcing of these vitamins or capsules, or sometimes liquid droplets, how they're being done, if they're coming from like big, large fish, those have the potential to be a little bit more concentrated in things like mercury, arsenic, cadmium, which are all heavy metals. And now we're distilling it down into a little supplement. So it is important to have testing on board for these things. And then, there we go. And then our third is protein. So, I feel like this one for some people, depending on who you talk to, from the dietitian standpoint, there's a certain window of time postpartum in which you want to have very like warm, nourishing foods. But I'll tell you, I am team like, if you can eat it, we're going to eat it. And not everybody just wants to eat warm, nourishing, soft foods for 40 days, especially if you're giving birth in the middle of August when it's hot as heck. So, being able to make a protein shake when you have, a minute to be able to put things together can be really valuable. And we know that protein is important for a number of different systems in our body. Like protein is also generally the most talked about macronutrient right now. And so it's a good time to prioritize it within this population. And when I kind of reference the dosing, you'll see I talk about, a higher dose for a, complete protein product, whereas there's some people who just take collagen as their protein source, which is fine. Again, it's not complete in terms of all amino acids. Just be aware of that. But if you want to utilize that as part of your protein, that is fine. Ideally, the supplement you're taking has vitamin C in it for better absorption, or you're taking it with a dietary source that has vitamin C, whether you're having it with an orange or some lemon or something along those lines. And, any and all of those supplements are appropriate. So whey versus pea or any other plant-based versus egg, it's more about what you can take, what you can handle, what you can tolerate. And then from the formulation standpoint, again, I did want to acknowledge within the pregnant population in particular, thinking through kind of nausea, some of those artificial sweeteners can be pretty icky for people. So I would avoid that. I often have a lot of my mothers to be have a actual unflavored protein powder on hand because it's easy to mix into things and they don't get that aggressive flavor one way or another.
Mel, can I just jump in quickly on the protein? Just
You sure
so
can.
the audience, yeah, thanks. Just so the audience are aware, alongside Informed Sport, we also have other certification programs, and one of which is called Informed Protein. Now, Informed Protein is a relatively new program for us, so it's in its infancy. We currently have 59 products on the program, but it's growing pretty rapidly. And Informed Protein is a label verification program to showcase that if a product says there are 25 grams of protein per serving, we're independently verifying that that is the case. We know that within the industry, there have been cases of amino spiking, which is where some brands can kind of almost overinflate how much nitrogen is in the product, and then the nitrogen amount within that product dictates how much protein is within it. And so there have been certain cases in the past. Often it can boil down to just kind of miscalculations when they're, formulating the products. But it's really important, especially with the cost of living crisis, that people are getting what they're expecting and what they're paying for, and they're really getting that value for money. So we're seeing some kind of really exciting growth in the program. And obviously, if you've got a powdered product or a liquid product that's on Informed Sport and it's protein, it can also be dual certified with Informed Sport and Informed Protein. So the likes of Caged, GNC, Muscle Farm, MyProtein, PhD, Transparent Labs, they all have products on the program, which is pretty cool. So one to look out for, just as an additional mark of trust and quality.
Yes, it's easy. It makes a shopping a lot easier when you can look at a product and say, oh, this is Informed Sport or Informed Protein approved.
Yeah.
Great. I can just kind of walk away. You just don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, take some of the thought process out. With so much choice, it definitely helps whittle it down.
So just to kind of throw in some honorable mentions and highlight Alicia Montagna, who's just doing beautiful work in the mother athlete space with her not-for-profit For All Mothers, formerly known as And Mother. They're bringing childcare, they're bringing lactation support, they're doing a lot within the elite athlete space. So mega kudos to her and them. I'm going to talk through some of these. So iron, this is, again, we need to assess labs. We need to take a look at like the human being in front of us to assess symptoms to see if these things are appropriate. I really try and avoid iron supplementation, but we are talking about female athletes, and I would say most common deficiencies in female athletes, let alone pregnant and postpartum female athletes, are going to be things like iron, vitamin D. We get into kind of that bone health realm of things, and so we need to talk about it. But what we're looking at here would be ferritin and hemoglobin to best assess that. We think about choline as a supplement. It's often missing in prenatals, but it supports fetal brain development, liver health. So, we want to make sure that is that something we need to be supplementing with? Additionally, choline is also harder to get through our diet. If you're someone who regularly eats eggs, you'll find it in the egg yolk, not the white. You'll also find it in offal or organ meats, so things like liver, heart, kidney, if you consume any of those products. Magnesium is supportive of constipation, sleep, muscle recovery. I've talked about that sleep deprivation. It is real. Again, the muscle recovery in general, healing, and constipation. Constipation is a big one that people navigate through pregnancy, and especially in early postpartum, depending on the birth situation scenario. And so considerations there. Vitamin D, as referenced, bone health, bone density, very common deficiency in our athletes. Also pretty hard to get through the diet. And most people aren't getting enough sunlight, or they're wearing sunscreen before they get any sunlight. And so you're not going to get it that way either. So a worthy supplement consideration. And then we have electrolytes. Now, salt itself is relatively easy to get through the diet, depending on how you eat. Now, for people who have more hyperpalatable food intake, or they're eating more out of packaged foods, obviously your salt intake itself is going to be higher. Electrolytes also include things like potassium, magnesium, sodium chloride. So sometimes it's easier to just throw in a powder and drink it. Also, I'm kind of team if it gets you to drink more water, and you're someone who has a diet that doesn't include more of those hyperpalatable processed foods where you have to be salting your food quite a bit, this can be really helpful. And if you enjoy it, it's worth a consideration. So now that we know what to consider, I want to kind of talk a little bit about the assessment component. So again, I mentioned that lab work is very critical in thinking about the whole human being in front of us, our athlete, our team of athletes. What do we want that to be? If it's yourself, or again, someone you care for and oversee, we have to look at training loads. We have to look at the season of training they're in. So my hope is that you have like in-season training, you have off-season training, and our diet and our supplementation should maybe shift alongside that. And so there are a few things in which it might make sense to just take consistently every day forever, creatine being one of those things. We're looking at dietary gaps. So, allergies, intolerances, dietary preferences. Are we gluten-free, dairy-free, vegan, vegetarian? There's a lot of different versions of vegetarian. So assessing the gaps, assessing the diet, understanding where is it going to be easiest to support that athlete, especially during motherhood. The appetite and nausea are big ones, and my hope is that's something that is temporary. However, there are a number of women who do experience nausea throughout the course of their 9-month pregnancy. And so we just need to be aware of that in terms of how we can best support that person. If we look at postpartum stage, healing, recovery, lactation, I am absolutely team postpartum is forever, but there's different kind of seasons of that. You have very early in the trenches, those first 3 months, those first 40 days, and then you kind of start to shift out. Again, if you are lactating and breastfeeding or pumping, those energy demands be high. Those nutrient demands are going to remain high, and they're going to remain high even when you stop. So part of the concern that I see here is people stop breastfeeding and start restricting their intake, because we have not talked about that in this conversation, but I have to acknowledge it. We also live in a culture that expects women to give birth and then look or perform exactly the way they did before they were pregnant, which is ridiculous. We can perform better. I mean, let's be honest, if we have the right tools and support. But that being said, there's a lot of restriction that occurs in the postpartum period in particular. And if we're restricting our intake at a time when all of our needs are high, be it the need for physiological recovery, the need for lactation, and then the need for performance comes last, we set ourselves up for low energy availability if we're not supporting the needs of our body. And so please just be conscious of kind of that hierarchy. And this is not a time to be restrictive. This is a time to nourish and optimize so that we can kind of hit this next level version of ourselves that is very much possible on the backside of birth. When not to supplement. So, I think this is where we mentioned, having said kind of the proprietary blends in particular, right? So it's important for us to know what ingredients are in supplements. It's important for us to know the volume of each ingredient that is in our supplement, especially when we're pregnant, especially when we're lactating, because again, in any context, this is important, but there is a dual risk here to yourself, to the fetus, in terms of the development of their body and their brain. So we just need to be really thoughtful about that. And, understanding that research done on specific ingredients or supplements, there's going to be doses associated with that. It's not kind of random dosing and saying, okay, it's safe to use ashwagandha. There's a specific dose that is tested for a specific purpose that says this was effective, this was not effective, this was dangerous, this was totally safe. And so we need to be aware of dose ranges and how much of each ingredient is in the product that we are taking. A quick acknowledgement to prenatals and postnatals. So when we talk about the Wild West, this is the Wild West. And I will tell you, as someone who's advising on supplementation within the prenatal and postpartum vitamin space, it's really interesting to see that there is not a universal standard. So it's very much up to each company that is coming out with this product to decide how much of each ingredient they want to include in this prenatal multivitamin or postnatal multivitamin. So there's a huge variation in what you're consuming. Again, we mentioned kind of your honorables, the iron, the choline. I spoke about DHA earlier as a priority. Didn't talk about iodine, but referenced kind of the gestational piece of baby relying on our thyroid. That ties into our metabolic health. So some people, again, depending on diets and whatnot, that could be valuable. So this is going to apply to each person specifically. I think there's a number of people who really benefit from a prenatal and a postnatal, or a postnatal. I think there's a number of people who probably don't need it. And so, you know, I would flag some of these questions as you're asking, is this the right thing for me? Is this something I need? Is this something that would be beneficial for me? Or, you know, is this just kind of covering my bases, if you will? So we're getting to our closing thoughts here, but to start summing things up, I find kind of the visual of the pyramid to be helpful. So if we think about that base, we're talking about the diet, day to day, what that looks like, your macronutrient intake, your protein, your carbohydrates, your fats, your total energy intake. That includes hydration, your sleep, so your additional kind of like recovery lifestyle metrics, sleep stress management. We look at that second tier, and that's when our supplementation really starts to full come in to fill in those gaps. The potential for something like a prenatal. We talked about those three big supports: a creatine, a DHA, a protein. Again, for individual athletes and human beings, that profile might be different, so be open to that. Continuing to go up, we have some additional micronutrients. Again, I am highlighting the ones that I see more commonly as a need in this population. And then at the very top, just really prioritizing transparency and third-party testing. So some closing thoughts for you from me and my oldest child, celebrating my last postpartum half marathon with a little booby there. These are high performance chapters. Pregnancy, postpartum, it's another season of life. It's a high performance chapter. We need to start treating it like one and understand that nutritional needs are elevated. And while inconsistent intake, while low energy availability, these things are common, they're not normal. They are not normal, and we need to continue to speak and share and educate on how we can support this population so that that's not the common scenario. Strategic supplementation is a necessity. It is a necessity in this population. It is complementary to our diet. It is on par with what is needed, and we need to take it on an individual basis in terms of what exactly is going to be most appropriate for each of our people. The top three, again, highlighted that I see as most undervalued, underutilized, that might be really helpful in this population would be creatine monohydrate, omega-3 fatty acids, and protein. And as always, please utilize and look for Informed Sport and their varying certifications when you're purchasing your supplements, because we need to be able to trust what we're taking, be confident in what we're taking. And when we combine that testing, that trust, and that thoughtful supplementation, we give our pregnant and postpartum athletes the fuel and confidence that deserve. So that is it from me. Thank you.
Mel, thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed that. And I love the fact that yourself and others out there are kind of sharing this knowledge. Pregnancy is there's so many unknowns. I've got 4 little ones, and I had twins for my 3rd pregnancy. And even on my 3rd pregnancy, I still didn't really know what I was doing or what was coming up next. And I just think you just need thoughtful, supportive environments with real kind of education at the heart of it, and really clear messaging. I just think you've done a fantastic job today of talking us through what that looks like for athletes. I love that we're having the conversation. As I said, back in 2008, it was, do I want to go to London Olympics or do I want to try and start a family? And I love the fact now that people in the British rowing team and other teams can think, okay, I want to continue my career, or I want to have a family as well. No, no small feat, lots of challenges, but the fact that you're doing the work you're doing is amazing. And yeah, I thought you did a fantastic job. So just wanted to say thank you.
Oh, thank you. Of course, it's beautiful work. It's good work. I'm grateful to do it.
I can see why, and I can see your passion shines through. Zach, I know you've got possibly some questions in the wings. Would you like to run through those?
Definitely,
and I
definitely.
can see you now. Yay!
Perfect transition, Carla. So yes, that being said, we have gotten a couple questions in the chat, and we even had some that were pre-sent over prior to the webinar. That being said, if there's anyone right now who has any questions, if you haven't already, feel free to put them in the Q&A session right here. We'll be trying to run through as many questions as possible. But that being said, the first question we received actually came in advance of the webinar, where we have someone wondering if creatine is safe for the baby while if you're taking the supplement while breastfeeding.
So I can't give you the clear, definitive yes. I can give you the probably. The research is happening as we speak, and what we do know is, based on what we've looked at, there hasn't been a problem. So what I have seen kind of come up in terms of question here is the baby's kidneys. Are we harming the baby's kidneys? Is this a problem? And the answer for that is there doesn't seem to be an issue yet, especially when there is so much upside to taking creatine through pregnancy, through postpartum, and with lactation. So as expressed, if you look up Dr. Stacey Ellerly, Dr. Sue Kleiner, Dr. Abby Smith-Ryan, Dr. Scott Forbes, Dr. Darren Cadnell, the creatine giants, if you will, you'll find a number of kind of literature through them there. But Dr. Stacey Ellerly is doing a lot within this population specifically. So I would take a peek, and my goal and my mission is to help you make the informed decision for yourself about what you feel most comfortable with. But my suggestion, as expressed with creatine specifically, is it's not should I be, it's why am I not, or big creatine advocate over here in this population.
Perfect. And while we're on the topic of creatine, now you may have just touched on it again here, but still just wanted to throw it out in case we had missed another one from earlier on. We did have a member of the chat earlier on today, Paula, ask, can you repeat the name of the researcher who's doing work on creatine?
Yeah, Dr. Stacey Ellerly.
Perfect. Well, that is all that we have had sent through in the chat so far. This being said, we'll take a quick moment here. Just wanted to thank you guys all again for coming out today. Carla, Mel, thank you both for being a part of this webinar. And thanks to all of our registrants today for joining us here for this hour to sit down, chat a little bit about this new conversation we're having here at Informed. Excited to begin conversations around it. This being said, you will all be receiving an email within the next day that includes a recording of this webinar. If there were any parts you wanted to go back through and watch again, you'll be able to do so. And if you're interested in learning more about Informed Sport or about Nutrition by Mel, please visit our websites or message us at WeTestYouTrust@lgcgroup.com. Thank you once again for all coming out today. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we will see you guys during one of our next webinars.